You are listening to the Smart Betting Club podcast with me, your host, Peter Ling. Now, this podcast is sponsored by the Matchbook Betting Exchange, and you can find out more on what they offer smart bettors over at matchbook.com. And if you are interested in learning more what it takes to make a profit betting, please do check out my service for winning bettors over at smartbettingclub.com. Hello and welcome to the Smart Betting Club podcast. My guest today is a professional punter, but one that tackles a quite unique betting market in the form of in-play football betting. As well as this, is also a former professional poker player and was a sports journalist for the biggest sports paper in Denmark. So it's a big warm welcome to Mads Kindberg Nielsen from the Monetos website. Hi, great to have you on. How are you?
Hi, Pete. I'm fine, thank you, and thank you for having me. It's an honor to be here. I really love to discuss and talk about sports betting, so I can't think of a better place to be.
Oh, exactly. It doesn't feel like work, does it, when you're talking about betting?
It doesn't.
It doesn't. So let's talk a bit more about who you are and your background. So do you want to tell listeners about yourself, what you've done and what you currently do in the betting space?
Yeah, for sure. So actually, I started my journey in the gambling industry by becoming a professional poker player, and that's many years ago now. I think my first year was that in 2009 or 10 or something like that. And then I did that for 4 to 5 years, getting better as the years went by and grinding cash games mostly. And when I've been raised by my parents, been told that remember to get an education. So that's why I started doing journalism instead. That's always been a big dream of mine, to take it where I did, to becoming the cycling reporter of biggest sports newspaper in Denmark. I'm pretty happy with that. Also doing soccer. And yeah, just I'm sure we get into some of this stuff later on, but then I started sports betting after I met my co-founder in Monetos as well, Stefan Dam. So that's kind of my journey to where I am today.
So it was journalism first, and then you found a natural affinity towards poker, which evolved into sports betting. What was the timeline like?
Yeah, poker first. And then when I was, I think it was 2011, I started doing journalism at the university level here in Denmark. And then I was educated in 2014. And then I was hired by this newspaper. And then I stopped by myself in 2018 and been a sports betting ever since, really.
Yeah, so you're very much now a professional sports punter, professional sports bettor for what, 5-6 years, and live off that. That's fascinating because it's great to know, good to know people's journey. And, you know, obviously that ability to play poker, I had guests on before who did that earlier on. And obviously the poker world has evolved now and it's a lot more difficult than it was previously. But I'm guessing, obviously, of the ability with poker and now sports betting, you have affinity and ability to work with numbers and an enjoyment of that, and ability to find an edge. Would that be correct?
To be honest with you, I'm not a numbers guy, really. I'm more a thinker. Not that numbers guys don't think they do, but I just try to find an edge in a different way. And what I think that poker learned, me at least, is that you have a lot of different information. In poker, it's who am I playing against? What are my pot odds? How has the cards fallen out? What have I done in similar situations early on and stuff like that? And all those different elements you have to put into a decision and then go either way that you think is good for you long term. And that's the same thing with sports betting. Like you have all these different things happen. Let's say in a soccer game, how much time is left? What are the odds? Can I remember any historical odds? This particular spot, how has the game been? What have the managers done from the bench? Have they substituted anyone? So you have to narrow all this down to one way to go. Do I bet or do I not? And that's the biggest thing I think that poker has learned me is that becoming skilled to, under pressure, the time is ticking, to sort of make the most of it. I think that's the best way to put it.
Okay. So it's a mix of like intuition, experience, knowledge of your particular sport or market, and combining that.
I would say intuition is pretty big for a guy like me, not a numbers guy, because I've been in the situations many times before. So maybe I already sort of know the answer. It's not that I don't think of it in the next game, but having been in a situation many times over the years just gives you a feeling inside. Okay, so is this a bet or is it not? So yeah, intuition. That's a very good word.
So it's like a gut feel almost, and you have to go with that rather than going, well, I feel like this is a bet, but let me check the numbers. You just go with like that. That feels like a bet because I've seen this before.
That's the way I feel.
That is really interesting because obviously we get very different approaches from different people, and less so with your angle, I would suggest, than more numbers guys, obviously modelers and algorithms and what have you. Let me ask you about your journalism though. Why not pursue that? What made you decide to go down this route rather than journalism, like you say, which is a more traditional route, and perhaps people would think that's a safer approach?
I would say three things. First of all, I couldn't recognize myself in the paper business anymore. It was always letting people go, and it's not that there weren't any ambitions, but it was just year after year, people will let go, and not many new hirings, and the budgets were cut all the time. So starting in 2015 or 14, we went to almost any soccer game in the best league in Denmark. And over the years, when the budgets were cut, couldn't afford it, and it became only the biggest clubs, just to name an example. So that's the one thing that I couldn't really see myself in that industry going forward. That's number one. And number two is that I saw a potential in sports betting coming from my poker background, and after discussing sports betting with Steffen, as I mentioned in your intro, I saw a potential and I saw a way that maybe I can do something here. I was new, so I had to learn, and I had to sort of adapt this new mindset of being a sports bettor, not a poker player. And also all of this, what about my monthly wages? I mean, you're not guaranteed anything sports betting, but you are being a journalist. So obviously I also had my considerations there, but I kept my spending down and didn't really use a lot of money. So I wasn't so afraid to take the jump. And then the third thing is that I also wanted to try something else. Really, that's just being honest with you. I like to challenge myself, and I like to evolve, not only as a human being, but also in my work life. And I couldn't really see with the things that I mentioned from the budget cuts and all that, see how I could get the same challenges going forward being in journalism industry compared to what I could achieve in the sports betting industry. So these three things combined really made the difference for me, and then it was easy to raise my hand and say, hey, I don't want to be here anymore, so let's figure that out. And then we did that.
No, it makes a lot of sense. It's fascinating to hear about the thought process and why. Let's pivot then to talk about Monetos, which I believe is Danish slang for the word money.
Yeah.
Which is great. And so you work on that with Stefan and a few others.
And Tony, yeah.
Yeah. Tell the listeners about the website, what the goal of it is. And I think you have a podcast, you have a whole bunch of articles, and there's a service that spins out of it as well. Just tell us a little bit about it.
Before I do that, can I take you back to the time where we started Monetos in 2020?
Yes.
Because all of us, I'm sure we remember COVID. We were locked inside our apartments and houses and all that, and we didn't have much to do. There were no games to bet on either. Many soccer leagues.
It was a terrible time. Yeah.
It was.
Belarusian football. That was about it.
Yeah. But then Stefan and I, together with Tony, we were discussing some stuff, and we have this passion, all of us, sports betting and soccer, and we also like talking about it and writing about it. And then we got together and said, hey, why not create something? Let's make our own universe of betting and try to see if we can do something. Why not? There are no games to bet on anyway, so let's go. And then we agreed on that and started in the spring, I think it was, of 2020. And then from there on, that's true, we've grown to having our own website now. We have our own podcast. That's where it all began. We did 30-minute podcasts talking about sports betting and actually also in the beginning, non-betting stuff, soccer talk pundits came on to discuss the current affairs and all that. But we decided some years later to focus 100% on sports betting. So we just continued doing podcasts, Premier League stuff, and all that. Have created our own website where we have articles as well. We publish 2 picks a day right now. And then obviously it's also a great landing page for us, selling subscriptions on Telegram, the live service, as I'm sure we're going to talk more about later on, and also a pregame service that we are running. So that's really who we are.
And is it helpful having that as a business and as a service to help dovetail with your own professional sports betting?
Yeah, I would say so, because that keeps you on your toes, if that's an expression in English.
It is.
Yeah, you have to. There's sort of an honor in delivering your best when people are paying you to do so. I hate it every time I post a bad number or I make a mistake. It happens. We're all humans, right? It's just the feeling inside. I really hate it. It can tear me down. Not that I lose my own bet. It's like, okay, whatever. I'm playing responsibly. I have a bankroll and all that. So it happens. Yeah. But it's like knowing that people who are paying you to deliver your best also played what you did and then lost their money. Oh, that's really hurtful.
Yes.
So you have to be on top. You have to think everything through. You have to sort of reconsider what you're doing. I was talking about tuition earlier on, but here it's actually pretty helpful to sort of sit down, write your thoughts down. Being a journalist, obviously that comes pretty easy for me because I'm educated in that. So there's no trouble in doing that. But it's more the thinking process that you're forced to think it through. And that's really, really good. Also for my own betting, because earlier on I have written the analysis and then was ready to go and post it to the subscribers. And then just, thought about it a second time and maybe it didn't feel right. Or maybe I went through all the things that I wrote. And then, okay, so what about this part? You're writing this now, but could it be this instead? And those second thoughts from yourself are really helpful. And that's only because we have the subscribers. Otherwise, I'm not sure I'd do it that way or be as observant about it.
I know that working with other people, you mentioned Stefan and Tony, if they're involved in whether they're professional bettors or people who are involved to make a profit, you work with them and help each other, inform each other, educate each other. So if all three of you see value in something, then perhaps it tells you it's actually very valuable versus if just one person or you have a debate over something where you're on both sides.
That's very true. And we have seen that many times in the past. And obviously, we also have our own messenger threads and all that, discussing games and stuff like that. And every single time, not every single time, because we can be wrong as well, even if more like the idea. But it's just so obvious that if you're alone on an island against all the other wise guys, it's not often you're on the right side. Let me put it that way. And that's also the dynamics of the betting market. That's why we mentioned closing odds as well. That's why that's important.
It is.
Yeah, because that's more people putting their money on one side, skewing the odds. And that's also a very helpful thing when you're doing your own research, I would say.
Yeah, well, what you mentioned there about being on an island, it's really important because I speak to a few sharp punters, big bettors, and they say if their numbers are completely out of sync with the market, then even as some of the most successful bettors, they realize they're wrong. There's something wrong in that, and they have to double, triple check because very often there's a small deviation.
Yeah,
but there's not going to be a huge difference, and so if it is, then it's something. So it obviously helps working with other people to just cross-reference and correlate, whether that be closing odds or whether that be some other metric. It certainly is helpful.
Yeah, just one last quick point on that is that you also have to believe in yourself. I'm not saying that you can't make your own decisions, but it's just that you have to really, really think it through.
Very true. So we'll talk about your in-play bet in a second. And that's the main thrust of what you do, as I understand it. Is that what you do mainly at Monetos? It's obviously all in Danish, so it's one of those things where I'm trying to work out exactly what's going on. But in-play is the main thing of what you do personally, and then obviously through Monetos. Is that correct?
Yeah, I would say so, yeah. I post most of my bets there. So yeah, that's true.
Now let's get into that then, because we have the tie-up with us at SBC. We'll explore that shortly, but you don't meet many in-play football bettors. I mean, it sounds fascinating and it's great that you can make a profit from it. And I think people listening will be very curious as I am. But what made you focus on that market? Because it's not an obvious choice for many punters. It goes back to the intuition that you spoke of and that ability to go, I can see there's value in these bets. I just have this feel. And you saw that was correlating with the actual profits you were making.
I also think it suits me better as a person because going back to poker, it's like you have this shot clock on you every time that you have to make your decision now and fast. And that suits my way of thinking really great. It's not that I don't do pre-game betting. Of course, I do that as well. But once you sit there, you sort of have more time to think it through. And yeah, okay, the odds is still the same, even 30 minutes after I started looking at it. But here it's like you have to act, and you have to act now. I think that suits my skill set better. I would say I'm a better in-play bettor than I'm a pre-game bettor. But that's also obviously because I use more time on in-play betting. So these things all often go hand in hand. But that was one of the things. And also just there are so many games to bet on. And also account restrictions and all that. We've been through that before. It's if you wager on in-play games, your accounts are most likely going to last longer. So that was also part of my decision.
Yeah, so that's about that. Have you been able to quantify that? Obviously, you bet pre-match as well. Do you find it lasts a certain multiplier or a certain amount of time longer? Or does it just get to a point with a certain account once you pass a certain profit threshold and they say, well, this guy's beating us and we don't know why? Or obviously, you can't necessarily benchmark against closing line on in-play bets. Do you able to quantify it?
You do have some advantages, yeah, as a bettor.
Yeah. Have you been able to quantify, though, that the advantage from that perspective of the fact that bookmakers...
I would say so, but I've been closed down as well. So yeah, it happens.
You just get a lot more rope than you would if you were taking...
Yeah, I would say so. Yeah, definitely.
Okay.
You do get that.
Which is a massive advantage for people in the modern world, because obviously all bookmakers are also offering live bets. You know, I'm looking at different firms around the world and they're all offering live markets because obviously so many of them are international these days anyway. So what they're offering in one country is the same as in another where they have a license. So I want to ask you, though, about how you actually specialize in it, because there's so many live games. I've seen someone who does in-play football betting and they have a system which triggers alerts to them to say, look, there's a certain discrepancy in this game, take a look. But are you actually watching these games? Do you have 5 TVs on at the same time watching 5 games?
I have 2 big computer screens for sure.
Okay.
And I'm watching as much as I can. But also, I would say that 2 games, maybe 3 games, that's my maximum. It's very difficult to focus on 4 games. But obviously, you can, especially in the last round of, let's say, I know the Champions League is going to be a new format this season, but the group stages, we could take the Euros, for instance. The last group games are almost always very interesting because stuff will happen there and you can profit from that because the algorithms and markets might think of it another way as you would. You get this one where both teams must attack to sort of advance. And that's really one of the key points in live betting, that you want to find those spots. But going back to your question, it's mostly 3 games at a time. I try to specialize in German soccer. I speak German fluently and understand the language. And at the time when I was becoming a sports bettor and also a public expert, I started at other betting sites and I sort of had to specialize in one area instead of just, grabbing a bit from the Premier League, the Champions League and all that stuff. And I chose the German second division, the Zweite Bundesliga, to focus on because I didn't know any experts specializing in that league. So I thought, hey, why not make it my league? And it's still a pretty big league because I would say it's a top 10 league in Europe, still with all the teams there, which means you can also bet hefty amounts on the games. The limits are bigger, obviously, the bigger the league. So I thought, hey, why not start there? And I've kept doing that ever since, focusing on the second division and also first Bundesliga, of course, as well. That came by over the years. So I try to watch as many games there as I can to sort of get a bit of feeling of the teams and what they're doing in different situations and all that. But then obviously also I use LiveScore and FlashScore and all those sites. And just to give out an example, I posted a bit yesterday from the Italian Serie B.
I took that one.
Yeah, and they scored in the end, so we were all happy. But it was a really good bet because they had another goal disallowed and all that. And it's not a league I specialize in, to be honest. But I just saw something about the game that I really liked. And then I was researching on air if you can put it that way, digging in some stuff. What were the pre-game odds? How are the teams compared to each other? What are the expected goals up until now? How has the game been? And I just wanted to see 5 minutes of the game in the second half before I posted Bari, 0.5 Asian. So they basically just had to win by 1 goal from there on. They were down 1-0. And I really liked that bet. It was a great bet. So that's also how I do it. I try to sort of, before I start my session, go over the games that are running tonight. It's not that I follow every one of them or get notifications or anything like that, but it's just staying awake. And if I have a break in the 2 or 3 games I've chosen to watch, then I switch to that one and say, okay, maybe I can find something interesting here. And that happened there. So that's sort of how I do it.
Okay, I was going to ask you about the schedule. And interesting with that game you mentioned there, that I had a goal scorer bet for their opponent to Sassuolo, who were 1-0 up. And I think they had a red card in the first half.
They did.
And they substituted the other winger. And I was like, oh, great. Well, there's not likely to get a goal now because they're going to try and defend a 1-0 lead. But it's interesting because you put that up after 54 minutes. Like you say, you wanted to see some 5 or 9 minutes of the second half, see how the Bari were attacking. And then you got odds of 1.83 on them to win, or basically to overcome that, to win from 1-0 down, to win that Asian handicap.
In-play betting is really about timing, because I thought about betting it already at halftime because I was aware of all the things that I also put in the analysis already by then. But sometimes, speaking from experience, I've just seen completely different approaches in the second half that I didn't like. And I wouldn't want to, with a team that I'm not so confident about, I wouldn't want to sit there with my bet and then they just have 0 shots on target in the second half because they're bad or anything like that. I wanted to see what the halftime did. And then after seeing they were just attacking for a full 5 minutes in the second half, I was pretty certain about the bet. And that's why I posted it there. But obviously also some other times they would have scored in those 5 minutes. And then I would have missed out. That's also part of in-play betting. So you really have to think about your timing, and the more games you watch and the more closely you look, I think you become better at that, to sort of, as let's say, know. I know you can't know anything for certain, but then you just know that, okay, now's the time. Now let's get on. But it's the future. So it's not that I have a crystal ball or anything like that. And I'm going to miss a bit in the future as well. And I'm going to misread a game in the future as well. That will happen. But it's just, serious sports betting is about the long term. And that's where you can really gain an edge, I would say.
Yeah, absolutely. I think in that game, though, they had 2 goals disallowed for VAR
yeah.
until the 90th minute. And obviously, that went in and the bet won. In terms of the efficiency of the pricing, do they follow a set approach? So I know you quote from Bet365 as the benchmark, but do you find that the bookmakers adapting as you are to those in-play odds, or they just always follow the similar pattern?
The bookmakers adjust and the market adjusts, because also you have to remember that the odds in play are also derived from where the money are being bet. So that's also an important factor. Speaking of the Bari game yesterday, actually the odds was the same for a full 2 or 3 minutes after I posted the bet. And that's always a very good sign, because that means that other people are finding this site the right one as well. It's very bad if you post a number and then 30 seconds later it's just popped 20 cents or something like that. Then you might be on the wrong side. But it's always good when you're betting the favorite or over goals that the odds just stays where you bet it, or maybe even lower, because as time goes by, then obviously you have a shorter amount of time to hit your bet. Yeah, so that's good. But I would say generally the live market is pretty efficient. You have to look for stuff like red cards, where the algorithms might be a little off sometimes. I'm sure they have this standard set that, okay, so if a red card appears, then historically this has happened, and that is why our odds should be this now. But it's just that if you look for something else, like substitutions, you mentioned a substitution. Let's say I knew Sassuolo. I would say, okay, so now they're going to play like that. I remember they have done this 2 times earlier this season, and they were just hammered after doing that. They were totally destroyed by their opponents, but yet they somehow keep doing it. Then I would say that, okay, so the historical odds, how relevant are they here? What should be relevant is that I have a read on this team saying that this is a very bad tactic from them, and we should exploit this. So I would focus more on that and not the efficiency of the odds right there, because I would trust my own analysis. But obviously, also other times you have to pass. I passed in the Galatasaray Young Boys game yesterday as well, because I found the odds at the end too short. I didn't like the price, so that's why I didn't bet it, but it did cash the over in that game as Young Boys 1-0. But I would say in general, the odds are pretty efficient, but if you look, you can find value.
This podcast is sponsored by the Matchbook Betting Exchange. When it comes to betting exchanges, Matchbook has been my personal go-to for some time now. Using horse racing as an example, they've offered the best prices on the most runners this year, which can make a big difference to your bottom line. Plus, with an industry-leading score of 4.2 on Trustpilot, you know you're in safe hands. Download the Matchbook Betting Exchange app or go to matchbook.com today. And if you enter the code SBC150, that's SBC150 on sign up, you can get commission free for your first 150 days, which can give you even more value. If you need to place a larger or more bespoke bet, or are indeed a corporate or operator client, their brokerage service is excellent and available 365 days a year. For more details, email the team at brokerage@matchbook.com. Matchbook Betting Exchange is for bettors who know better. In terms of the advantages and disadvantages, we talked there about the advantages with your accounts, but obviously there are some things to bear in mind. Live feeds being delayed, scoring issues, you're relying on a flash score and you don't realize there's VAR checks. So do you have to be watching the game really to get a sense of it to bet on it, or do you do it without that, bearing in mind there are possibly issues with the data you're receiving?
So obviously you have to be aware, because the bookmakers use a live feed for their odds, and they can adjust quicker than most of us can. And that's why time is of the essence here. And I thought about an example before going live here. I remember a Paris Saint-Germain game when Leo Messi was still playing there, and he was injured during a game. And obviously the odds on the opponent just dropped massively in the next 1 minute or two. And if you sit at home watching on a TV signal, which might be at the least 30 seconds delayed, maybe even a minute, and if you're streaming by Chromecast or anything like that, maybe 1.5 minutes, then you can't sit there and see Leo Messi get injured and think, wow, I'm going to bet the other side, because it's too late. It's already happened. And once you see that injury, actually the value might start becoming back the other way on PSG, because now all have bet the opponent for the last 1.5 minutes. If I was sitting in my couch watching a game on Chromecast or anything like that, and I knew that my signal was delayed, I would probably consider betting the other side. You also have to think of this when you do in-play betting. What signal am I on? I would say always use the live feeds from the bookmakers. Monitor the odds, what happens. Because the more you do that, the more you sort of get a grip of what's really going on here. Try to see where the money is going and what the bookmakers are doing, because that might give you some guidance as well.
The resource to check out first. And how about stoppage time? I think I've seen quite a few bets of yours, or from Monetos in general, which obviously take advantage of lengthy stoppage time these days, because we've seen over the last few years, I think there was a game last night where I had a bet which lost due to the fact there was 10 minutes stoppage time in Spain. And I had a corners bet that went down because of that particular reason. Is that something that you factor in? Is that something you're able to take advantage of?
For sure. But again, it's a dynamic game, so it changes. If everyone keeps betting the over, because now we have more stoppage time, or the favorite, obviously more time is good for goals and for the favorite, because they're probably a better side than the underdog. So the more time they get to play, the more they should win in theory. But obviously, if everyone goes that way, then you might want to start looking for some underbets or some underdog bets, because the odds get skewed too much in favor of the stoppage time. But yeah, I did some research before the podcast here, and I found the average stoppage time in the Premier League since 2014, the 15 season. And at that time, it was 6 minutes and 36 seconds average stoppage time. It's the numbers from Premier League's own website I'm quoting from here. And then last season, it was a jump up to 11 minutes and 39 seconds. So that's almost double up 100%. Not entirely, but it's still way more up than we're used to. The season before that, 2022-23, it was 8 minutes and 27 seconds. So it's still growing, that number. And you have to factor that in because, as I said before, the more time there is to play, the more goals and favorite victories we should see. And that's also what the numbers say from the Premier League, that we have had more goals. And if I remember correctly, last season was actually a record season with the number of goals scored.
Yeah, that's fascinating. Yeah, the growth of that is huge, isn't it, in terms of that? I know people used to joke about Fergie time.
Yeah.
Man United always getting late goals. But
yeah.
Certainly, there is that particular edge that we can look to take advantage of. And I wanted to ask you, though, because obviously you do pre-match, do you find a greater edge with the in-play, or is it the fact that you can get greater volume down versus the pre-match games that you take? How do the two compare?
Yeah, I would say the volume is pretty big. And also doing pre-game betting, I find that the best odds are probably the offline bookmakers, and some of them post their numbers even before Pinnacle. You don't want Pinnacle to post their number because the limits are pretty small there, and it only takes maybe a 100 euros bet or 100 pounds bet to move the odds 10 cents, and then the value might be gone. So I would say always look for places where you can bet pre-game, where they publish their odds early on. But it's also, I think you have to choose here in life. I have chosen to focus more on live betting because I find that suits me better, and I find that suits my skill set better. So that's why I've chosen to do so. But obviously, I still do pre-game betting also because it's when you watch, especially as I do, the German teams, I do think I have an edge there because I know much about the teams and where they're at this point of time, and also historical odds. That's something I use pretty much because in my head, I have my own power ranking of the teams, and I pretty much know where they're at right now. And if I remember, one team A was at even odds in this game away, and now I can see that team B is 220 odds in the same game, and nothing has really changed. Then I might say, okay, that's strange because I have team B better than I have team A. So shouldn't the odds be below even odds? That's also something I make pretty good use of in pre-game betting.
Oh, fascinating. No, it's really good. And I've been very impressed we've got a tie up with yourselves, Monetos, and we launched that in the spring. It's smartbettingclub.com/Monetos. And I'll slide the links into the show notes for this. But, you're hitting 6% ROI. That's Bet365's benchmark prices. And we actually looked at how many of those would correlate to the Betfair Exchange and some odds tracking, and that bumped up to just over 10%. Now, not all the markets are on the Betfair Exchange,
sure,
or even have liquidity if they are, but I think around half of them do. So just shows you the value in that. And I've been doing these. I don't take them with Bet365. I don't have an account access with them, but I have various other soft accounts which allow me to bet on these markets. And so you're getting value with them, but also you're placing bets which are the bookmakers look upon favorably, shall we say, and are unable to benchmark and simply see in-play bets coming in on football. And even if they're relatively smaller leagues in their eyes, it still looks like you're just someone sat on your couch with a game on in the background, wanting a bet for the sake of it, which is the type of customers bookmakers seem to like. So I can hardly recommend that. But while I have you, Mads, I wanted to ask you about the mental side of betting, because you've written extensively about that. Some really good articles online, getting the best from yourself, and given your experience over the years, I'd love to tap into what you've learned about that. So for you, what differentiates them between winners and losers, the qualities perhaps that the former have and the latter don't? And then we'll get into some other topics related to it after that.
I would say in-play betting is a mental game, really, because even though we've hit 6%, it can also go quickly the other way because you have many bets during a weekend of watching many games. You really have to be at your A game playing. It won't suffice if you play your C game, really. So I would say it is a mental game, and it can be pretty tough if you're a recreational player or have the ambition of becoming a professional and don't master the mental sides of betting, then you won't cut it simply because you'll make so many errors, I would say, in your downswings that those would be worse than your good hit rates. So I think that's really big. And thank you, by the way, for mentioning the articles and praising them. It's I think it's really fascinating. And I must admit that I wasn't really good at that when I was playing poker. I did tilt from time to time. I did play my worst, and I could just see my losses getting bigger and bigger. And that's why I thought I have to do something, because I can see that when I'm playing my A game, that I'm challenging the other players and that I'm winning from them. So how come that I can't really go beyond this where I'm at now in my career? And that's when I started reading about this topic. I read a book. I can really recommend it, highly recommend it. It's called The Mental Game of Poker, written by Jared Tendler. He's an American former, I think he's a mental coach. And it was just so eye-opening for me because he mentioned this A game, B game, C game, where the idea is that the A game, we all have this. That's where we play our best. That's where we use the right statistics. That's where we are in the zone. That's where our phone is on flight mode. But don't put it on flight mode if you want to place in-play bets from it. But anyways, that's where we are focused. Then you have the B game. That's where, okay, the phone rings and you'll answer it. So you're only watching the games with one eye, and maybe you're writing other stuff next to watching the games. Just to use an example, where I'm at now, maybe I'm doing other stuff at the computer, or I'm reading an article or whatever that might be. Then I'm in the B game zone. Then the C game zone, that's where you're tilting. That's where you're hammering your fist against the wall when you lose. That's where the emotions have taken over. And I have one advice that I got from a former mental coach. That's when you are playing your C game, just stop right away. Close the computer down, do something else. And that's really important because as human beings, we are always working on our A game. We always want to find the best statistic. We always want to watch as many games as we can. We always want to read this, read that. But none of us are working on our C games, really. None of us are identifying, okay, so when I'm pounding my finger against my computer mouse, I did that playing poker. And I lied to myself, really, because I was just so stubborn and I said, I never tilt. And then this coach, he said to me, yes, you do. Everyone does. So try to be aware of it. And then I thought, okay, yeah, whatever. I'm paying this guy to be the wise guy, so I might as well listen. And then I started noticing that once I was losing in poker, maybe I was unlucky. That happens both in poker and in sports betting. I noticed that I did this with my mouse. I was really hammering the click button. I was just so frustrated. I was not the yelling type or anything like that.
Yeah.
But I was just clicking my mouse so hard. And then I told him that in the next session. And he said, okay, that's fine. That's when you're playing your C game. Then stop. Stop? What do you mean? I have an edge. I'm supposed to play here. No, just stop right away because you're losing right now. That was really a big eye-opener to me because I learned so much from that experience. And then obviously the next things should be, so, okay, I've eliminated my C game. So what happens when you play your B game next time? The answer should be obvious. Obviously you stop because then you only have your A game left. And that's really a good way of thinking of it, I would say. Remember to work on your C game. What are your triggers? Try to find them and then stop, do something else.
Because ultimately, you're always going to have a period when you're in your C game and your B game. That's not a flaw of your personality. It's just normal.
Yeah, for sure. It's not that I don't make errors, because I do that still to this day. And I will do that in the future as well. You can't eliminate that, and you can't eliminate feelings, and neither should you. But I just think that the more you become aware of this, the better it is for your betting. So that's the advice from here, I would say.
Okay. So for you, it was tapping your mouse, but for somebody else, it might be maybe a physical manifestation of that, or maybe
walk the dog, watch a movie, ring your mom, do something else. Just don't bet.
Yeah, just don't bet. And exactly, but that's that being honest with yourself and saying, I am not always going to be on my A game. Therefore, I need to be aware of when I'm on my B and my C and try and recognize those times and what I'm doing or how I'm feeling or what I might be physically doing, to then stop that and go, I'm going to close my laptop. I'm going to put my phone on flight mode. I'm going to recognize that now's a bad time to bet.
Exactly. And be honest to yourself. I found that really hard in the beginning because I wasn't honest to myself. As you can hear, I lied to myself by saying I never tilt. And that would equal to say in sports betting, I never place bad bets. Of course you do. Everyone does.
Yeah.
Acknowledge that fact and become aware of it, and then know when to stop. That's the best advice I can give.
Okay, well, you've got me thinking now, what is it I do when I'm on my B game and C game? I don't think I click the mouse, but maybe I click my fingers. I don't know.
Try to find them because, you have something as well.
Yeah.
And all of us do. It might be something else. Maybe you just become distracted or read an article on the internet or something. Just try to stay focused as you can and play your A game.
Well, great stuff. And so I'll share the link to the article that you wrote because I enjoyed that. And I think I've listened to a podcast with Jared, the mental game of poker. I'm sure I listened to it because it was the golf coach. And you'd think, why would a golf coach be talking about poker? Because the worlds just overlap so clearly. And that, the mental side.
It's the mindset it's about, really. You can use that in many aspects of life, I would say.
Especially on a game like golf as well. I can imagine how that would apply to so many things because
for sure,
it's such a mental game.
It is.
Great. Well, that's fantastic. And thank you so much, Mads, for coming on because I've really enjoyed this conversation. It's not every day you get to talk to someone about a market like in-play betting, which is so infrequently used, it seems, but clearly seems to be significant edges there. And obviously all the mental side of it, that's fascinating. I was going to ask you for book recommendations, but obviously you've given me one. How about plans for the future in terms of what your own betting and your work at Monetos? What's on the horizon for you?
Yeah, so obviously we wish to grow this service. I think the in-play service has a massive potential that we're only tapping into right now, because the thing you have to remember with in-play betting is that almost all subscribers can get the posted number, whereas if you do pre-game betting subscriptions, then the odds will slide sometimes only after a couple of minutes. So I would say that's a pretty big advantage here, that you know that you can get your bet down almost always at the posted number. I'm not saying that it shouldn't be odds critical, because you have to. If you can't play at 1.8 and only play 1.73, then this bet might not be for you. So you still have to be odds critical, and it will happen that you can't get the posted number. But I'm just saying that it will happen more frequently, I would say. And also you have all the other advantages of maybe your account will last longer and all that.
No, it's very true. And often I don't find the exact same market at times, or maybe I find slightly different ones, which is on the same theme. Or maybe I take a mix of them. You may be betting on a certain goals line or a certain handicap, and I take a swathe of slightly different handicaps on the same team. But that ability to be aware of that, and also, like I say, not to bet if for whatever reason the value's gone and Messi's got injured or whatever it might be. So yeah, good advice.
Yeah.
Right. So that's fantastic. I really appreciate this conversation. I'll slide in all the links to the articles, the book, and Monetos into the podcast. If anybody wanting to find out more, are there any links how people can contact you?
They're welcome to follow me on X or Twitter or whatever it is. I'm at Mads K. Nielsen. That's probably one way to get in touch with me. Or we also have our email addresses on our website, where you link to the article that I wrote about mental game of sports betting. So you can find something there as well.
Well, thanks very much for coming on, Matt. Really appreciate the conversation.
Yeah, thanks for having me. The pleasure is all mine.